I want to talk about an interesting kind of concept because I've been watching some other videos, obviously, because I don't know what I'm doing, so I've got to go and watch other videos to find out what the hell I'm supposed to be doing. And there's an interesting thing going on where people are talking about like cheating in art, and people get all up in arms about tracing. And here's the thing. Let's talk a little bit about the concept of cheating in art. If I decide I want to draw, say, Rory Mercury from Gate, then I could grab a piece of reference, and people will be very quick to point out that, yeah, grabbing a piece of reference is definitely a thing that you can do. And if I were to take this piece of reference and I were to go, okay, I'm going to put this in a separate window over here, so I can look at it while I am over here in my actual illustration and kind of drawing the shape of Rory Mercury's face and coming up here and doing this. And then, of course, I want to put her eyes where they go. And those go up here. And then I want to put the nose in. And then I want to put this mouth in. And, you know, I'm doing a crap job here, but I always do a crap job, so you should be used to that. But nobody has a problem with that if I put the window over here on the side, and nobody would have a problem with it if I put the window, say, over here alongside of my reference image. And then you have the question of, well, what if I just have it on a layer right here? What if I have it on a layer in the same image? What if I draw right over top of that bit in my reference image? And now people just like lose their shit, you know? But what if, I mean, there are lots of other things. I mean, what if I pull down this little guide here and go, okay, that's the level of the eye. That's the level where the eye goes right there. So now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to draw this eye. And then the next eye goes like right under here. Can I use rulers to establish that and just kind of do that to figure out where everything needs to go? Or is that a problem? Can I use those tools? Are those tools something that I've got available? Where did I draw that? There it is over there. Okay. Can I use rulers and those kind of tools to do that if I can't like draw directly on the layer? What about this? What if I turn that layer off and I draw and then I turn the layer back on and go, how close was I? Oh, I was off. So I'm gonna do that. Okay. And now I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna draw over here. And how's that? Oh, that's not good. Let me erase a little of that and erase a little of that, and let me go in here and let me have another look. And no, I need to take this just a little bit higher up, maybe like right there. How does that look? If I'm turning it off and back on again, does that count? Am I still tracing? Is that still an issue? Is that a problem? I mean, where exactly does the line get drawn? If I'm trying to draw a commission for somebody, or if I'm trying to do something that I'm going to sell, then where exactly is the line on all of this? And lots of people are going to have lots of different opinions on where exactly the line is drawn on that. But the actual answer for where the line is drawn is, well, to be blunt, Rory Mercury isn't my character. I don't own this character. If I'm drawing a commission or I'm drawing something that I intend to sell, I can't be drawing Rory Mercury at all. It doesn't matter how I draw her. Regardless of what mechanisms I use, regardless of what methods I employ, what tools are used, I'm not allowed to draw her for money. That's somebody else's character that I'm not permitted to draw. That's what copyright means, the right to copy. I don't have the right to copy this character. I don't have the copyright. But people get really bound up in the question of, well, how exactly did you do that? And occasionally you talk to people and they get all up in arms and they talk about, the death of the author and how characters are really owned by the community. And as a general rule, I find that those people fall into a specific category. And that category is people who have never created anything of meaningful value. If you think copyright doesn't matter, and just because somebody created something doesn't mean they have any rights, it doesn't mean they have any say, it doesn't mean anything in particular, that's because you've never created anything. Because once you create something of your own that has value, you suddenly realize that if somebody else were to just copy your thing, then they would get the same results as you without doing all of the work. If you're not doing all of that work in the first place, if you've never done all of that work, if you don't know what it's like to put all that work in and produce something that's actually meaningful and valuable and that people would pay for, that they do want, if you've never done that, you don't understand just how shitty it is to watch somebody with less talent do less work and make more money, or even just as much money. It feels wrong. It feels unfair. So that's one of the reasons that I'm really big on doing the work, even though doing the work is not necessarily the best way to do stuff. Now, a lot of people will talk about using these tools. If we go beyond the question of copyright, okay, we've dealt with that. Let's move on from that. What about using these techniques to draw just a character? What if you start from a base, from a picture of a generic anime character? What if you start from something that you already have the rights to? What if you start from something that you've drawn yourself before, or that you purchased from somebody, or a stock image, or perhaps you've got a piece of software that will generate this kind of thing, like, I don't know, Clip Studio Paint gives you 3D models that you can just trace if you feel like it. They're right there. You could use them. And it's kind of a buying point for a lot of people when they pick up Clip Studio Paint. They go, Clip Studio Paint has these wonderful things that I can use. It has these 3D models, and it'll make art so much easier. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. It doesn't actually make it easier at all. And I'm going to get into why it doesn't make it easier in a moment. But first of all, a lot of people will complain and they'll say, well, what would the old masters say if you use techniques like this? What would Leonardo da Vinci say if you were tracing? Well, Leonardo da Vinci did all of the maths and drew up all of the plans for a machine called the Camera Obscura, which projects an image from a light room into a dark box, where it is then projected upward onto a canvas or a piece of paper where you can draw it. And what the hell is going on here? This is annoying. I need to be on brush. I need to be on the right sketch layer. But he brush, not paint bucket. God, I have no idea how to use this fucking software. But he built all of the stuff so that you could trace what was in the other room onto a canvas. All you had to do was be in a dark room while the other room was lit. And that was the key method to this. So clearly Leonardo didn't have a problem with this. 200 years later, Johannes Kepler would design a machine that didn't require the dark room. It didn't require the dark chamber, which is what Camera Obscura means. It means chamber dark. This is the Camera Lucida, or chamber light. And clearly the old masters didn't really have a problem with this. Now it would be another 200 years into the 1800s before anybody actually made a working Camera Lucida, or at least until somebody patented one, and we know for a fact that they were used relatively frequently. Kepler never used one, to our knowledge, never built one to our knowledge. He just drew up the plans for one, but as many of you probably know, Kepler was mostly known for telescopes and not so much for art. But in addition to that, in the 1800s, we developed this wonderful machine called a camera. You know, just plain old camera, not the camera obscura or the camera lucida, but just the photographic film camera. And by the end of the century, they were operating quickly enough and reliably enough that we could make motion picture cameras. So all the way up there, we could do the trick of taking video of the scene that you want to draw and then picking the one frame that's exactly the right pose you want. And you could cut the photographic film up with a razor blade and composite things together. And there were all kinds of neat little photographic exposure tips that you could use. The old masters didn't have a problem with tracing. They didn't have a problem with using reference. It's relatively recent that people have started to piss and moan about using the tools that are available to you. And in this particular case, I've got this 3D model that, of course, came with Clip Studio Paint, but the pose itself is a pose that I built. I did this pose. I took this particular character and I put it in this pose because this kind of standing and pointing with your hand on your hip pose is the pose that I wanted. And I can move it around and I can place it in. No, that's not what I want to do. No, not that. And I can move it around and I can place it where I want it and I can identify exactly how I want that to turn and I can rotate it in various ways and I can produce exactly the effect that I'm looking for. And once I produce exactly the effect that I'm looking for and I get exactly what I'm trying to get, then I can jump over to my sketch layer and I can pull up the brush and I can just start drawing the shape of that. And there's no reason why I can't just go ahead and trace over top of the model. It's up to you whether you think that's okay. I, for one, don't want to do that, but you could. There's no reason why you can't. But what I mostly want to talk about here is leading into kind of the subject that I'm going to talk about today, which is the difference between three-dimensional and two-dimensional art. And in particular, I want you to notice that when we look at this 3D model, okay, what we actually have here is we have got actual three-dimensional volumes, three-dimensional shapes that are faked with a convex hull. There's nothing inside this. It's not actually three-dimensional. It's just the surface. The inside of this entire thing is hollow. So let me kind of put this into a position that, oh man, this looks terrible. So I kind of put this where I want to put it. I would like to point the camera up a little bit. But this is a fake three-dimensional volume. It's not really a 3D volume. It's just the mathematics of where the surface is and how the light bounces off it. That's really all it is. And you're faking that three-dimensional volume with a notion of where the surface is, okay? And that takes a certain collection of skills. And if you were to move on and say, well, no, I want to paint a picture of this, well, that takes a different set of skills. And the different set of skills that you would be working with in that case is you're not working with volumes, you're working with shapes. So what you have is a notion of where the shapes are, and you start playing with values to identify whether you're looking at a light or a dark space. So you identify the shadows and you identify the highlights, and you would do that just by using two different colors to represent the particular value. And you would have over here your various shadows, and then you would add in your highlights, and your highlights would define through the shape of the light and the shape of the dark. They would cause the image to start to read as a three-dimensional volume. And as you come over here and you do the highlighted part of the shoulder and all of that, what you're using is different techniques that allow you to fake the same effect that you're getting from a three-dimensional volume, but you're doing it using just the shape and not using the full three-dimensional volume. Here, you're not doing the full surface. You're just doing a shape that looks like it, and that painted shape allows you to fake certain elements of a three-dimensional structure. Okay? And when you start working in drawing, and we'll switch over to the red layer for this, now what you're working with is just the edges. Now you're not working in shapes and you're not working in volumes. You're working in edges, and you're using those edges to fake the shapes. You're outlining where the shapes are. You're outlining where the individual elements go. And from outlining where those individual elements go, you can provide a reasonable approximation of what the shape is. You use the individual lines, the edges of the shape, to define the shape. Whereas if you were painting, you would be simply defining the shape. You would simply fill in the area where the shape goes. And of course, in a three-dimensional situation, what you would have is you would have an actual surface that you would rotate and move around until it presented the shape that you wanted. And all of these are very different sets of skills. And because they're different sets of skills, each of them requires a specific additional set of understandings and tools. And because you're starting from edges over here on the sketch, starting from edges requires you to go from just lines to shapes. Whereas when you're painting, you're going from shapes to a notion of surfaces. And those surfaces, once you get over here into the 3D modeling, you're using those surfaces to present the impression of actual 3D volumes. And then when you get into animation, you have to add all kinds of additional stuff like a notion of weight and a notion of inertia, a notion of how things move, what process the movement represents. And all of that is a very different set of skills as you move along. So if you're working in 3D, you're using one set of skills, and if you're painting, you're using a different set of skills, and if you're drawing, you're using another set of skills. Now, of course, you might ask, why would I use painting instead of working in 3D? Well, there's stuff that you can't do in 3D. The Penrose triangle is impossible to model in 3D. It's an impossible shape, but you can paint it. You can trick the eye. You can fool the eye. Similarly, there's an optical illusion of a fork. You can draw this with lines, but if you tried to shade it, if you tried to do some shading on it and say, okay, well, let's just kind of shade that in right there. Well, where exactly does it go to being a shaded flat surface from being a space? We got 3 tines here, and we've got 2 tines here. If you try to paint it, if you try to do it in shapes, it doesn't work. This illusion only works with lines. This illusion only works with shapes. Well, it can work with lines too. You just have to extend the lines properly. And if you extend the lines properly, then you can create the Penrose triangle, and then you've got a drawn version of it, which I did a shitty job of. I used to be able to do that a lot better. I just haven't done it in a long time. But what I'm really getting at with this is that when you go to do hair is kind of this odd duck in the realm of what you're doing with a character's appearance, okay? And the reason for that is, let me futz around with this and kind of get it into a reasonable position. Is that reasonable? There we go. That'll work. Okay, so here we've got our character, and here we've got the notion of we're going to put hair on the character's head. Okay? And I'm going to do that up here on the sketch layer. Now you can do this either by painting, and you could go, okay, I'm going to paint the shape of the hair. Okay, and you can come in here and you can go, well, here's kind of the profile of the hair. It comes up off of the head. We're going to have it cascade down the back, and we're going to have it come around over here, and it'll come back behind the ear, and some of it will come in front of the ear, and it'll come up here, and then up here we're going to have some bangs, and all of that's going to sit at some distance off from the head. You can just paint the shapes of the hair, and you end up with a particular effect. And usually you would do this with a much larger brush, and you would go, okay, here's the shape of the hair. Okay, and we're going to do that up here, and we're going to kind of, there's the hair there, and there it is there. And then you would go in and you would shade the hair to make it actually look like hair. And you would do that perhaps by you would go down to a smaller brush, and you would go, okay, here's some highlights over here, here's some highlights over here, and here are some. And you would want to kind of represent the various types of highlights in the hair. And you can do that in a painting fashion, but you can also do it in a drawing fashion. Now, what I'm finding as I go through and work with representing hair in a drawing is that hair is difficult to work with. And the reason it's difficult to work with is it falls into this neat little kind of midway point between a solid, like a cube, and a liquid, like a pool of water. Okay? And this is because it is fluid. Hair is fluid. It flows and it moves. As the head turns, the hair is going to move in a particular way. If this model were to turn its head around to the left, then the hair here around the shoulder would pull upward as the head turned. And if the head turned particularly rapidly, it would fly up energetically and then fall down and bounce. And there are all of these things. So when you draw hair, you're not just drawing the hair itself. You're drawing the energy of the pose. I think that's missing from a lot of stuff that I see people doing. You know, they're not really showing the energy of the pose as they're drawing their hair or as they're painting their hair. And I think painting really works better for hair. Although I'm not much of a painter, I'm not much of a drawer either, so I'm not much of anything. I just kind of suck at all of this. But you can also work from just like a sketching background, and you can go, okay, well, we're gonna have a clump of hair that comes out here, and we're gonna have another clump of hair that comes out here, and one here, and you can just kind of draw these individual areas, and you can make these shapes. And they might come together and actually work pretty well as an anime hairstyle, particularly since anime hair is kind of ridiculous and spiky and doesn't look like the real world anyway. And then, of course, you can add the ahoge, because you gotta have that. You gotta have that. You got your pink-haired character with all of the spiky hair all over the place. He's gotta have the ahoge because he's clearly a fucking idiot. But if you just draw the hair and then fill it in, that can produce a very different effect. And different people do it in different ways, obviously. But the thing that I've been noticing is that painting with a relatively large brush tends to produce better results for me. And I've been kind of experimenting with this and messing around most of the day. And then, of course, you've got your facial hair. That's got to come in here. And because you're working with kind of a shape rather than a volume, and then you're creating the volume by adding in some highlights and going, okay, well, here's the shiny part of the hair up here. And you need to recall the curve of the head. The head curves around like this. The head curves around like this. And you need to recall that as you're doing your little shading, and you need to have the curves in there, and you need to have some idea of where the hair is coming from and how the scalp works. The hair is growing straight out, and then gravity is pulling it down. And different races of people have different hair. Asian people have very coarse and very round hair, so it sticks out from the hair a lot farther. You notice this when you see Chinese guys who shaved their head and then just let it grow out, and they get this perfect kind of very straight, very round. It would be an afro if it was curly, but it's all just straight. It's just this straight hair that sticks out from their head like 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and that's like amazing. That's a hairstyle that only Asians can have, that hairstyle, you know. And then you've got obviously black hair. Depending on the cross section of the hair, if the hair is very round, then it tends to hold up and stay very straight for very long. But Caucasian hair tends to be kind of flat, and African American hair tends to be very flat. And when it's very flat, it makes these very tight curls, which you don't want to draw them like this. But it makes these very tight curls. It almost makes them look like a homogeneous unit, like they're all just one uniform mat, because the curls are nesting into each other and wrapping around each other, and it's hard to see individual hairs. And it's really always very hard to see individual hairs. What you're actually seeing is masses of hair that are lying next to each other. So anyway, the assignment that I'm going to kind of leave you with on this, because God, we're getting close to a half an hour. I was nervous about doing this video because I feel like I suck at drawing hair, but this is actually just a transparent excuse for me to say, hey, your assignment is to draw some hair, because then that's going to make me sit and draw hair for like an hour on Saturday, and maybe I'll get better at drawing it. Who knows? I don't seem to have gotten better at drawing anything else yet. But yeah, that's actually a thing that's been frustrating me, and that I've been thinking about and worrying about is, yeah, I'm doing these videos and I'm talking about anatomy and I'm talking about proportions, and then I'm doing these streams, and then I go and I try to do stuff just like on my own time, and I do sketches, but the sketches don't seem to be getting any better. I don't seem to be getting any farther toward a finished piece. I don't really know why, and I need to think about that. I need to think about why that is, and I need to think about what I'm going to do about it, because I've got to do something. I mean, I'm doing this in the first place so I can improve. The best way to learn something is to teach it. So I'm trying to figure out what it is that I'm doing wrong and why I'm not improving in any meaningful way that I can see. And I don't know. I'll ramble about that somewhat on Saturday night at 11 o'clock Pacific. And yeah, we'll get around to that. But yeah, the assignment is to try to draw hair. I say try because I haven't exactly shown you how to do a good job of it. But it is what it is. So yeah, on Saturday night at 11 p.m. Pacific, I will be doing an hour-long stream where I spend some time drawing hair, which I'm no good at doing because, you know, I need to do it somehow, and this is a good way to make myself actually, you know, practice and sketch and do shit. So yeah, I'll see y'all then, because I've done such a great job selling this. Just like I always do a great job of reminding people to like the video and subscribe and leave a comment and shit, because I'm just never really comfortable promoting myself, and I'm never comfortable ending videos either. So, you know, again, it's just like, okay, bye.